What if the most famous underdog moment in reality TV history was actually a carefully masked cry for help? To understand the Jonathan Antoine of 2026, we have to revisit the cold, fluorescent lights of the Britain's Got Talent stage in 2012. At the time, the narrative was simple: a shy, slightly disheveled teenager with an otherworldly voice. But as our investigation into his early career reveals, that moment was a powder keg of psychological tension. When Simon Cowell looked Jonathan in the eye and told him he should ditch his partner, Charlotte, it wasn't just a dramatic TV moment. It was a direct assault on the only support system Jonathan had. We've analyzed the footage, and the tremors in his hands weren't just stage fright. They were the physical manifestations of a young man on the absolute brink of a mental health crisis. For years, the public consumed this as a Cinderella story. But behind the scenes, the pressure to conform to an industry standard of the solo superstar was beginning to fracture his sense of self. The industry wanted a product, but Jonathan was a human being struggling with a sensory world that was far too loud. We now know that his refusal to leave Charlotte wasn't just loyalty, it was a survival instinct. This initial confrontation set the stage for a decade-long battle between who the world wanted Jonathan to be and who he actually was. As we look back from 2026, that audition remains the most misunderstood 120 seconds in television history, hiding a depth of struggle that would take another 14 years to fully come to light. The shy boy narrative was a convenient mask for a much more complex internal war that was only just beginning. The hidden diagnosis, beyond the label. For over a decade, the industry labeled him difficult or shy. But the 2022 medical revelation proved we were all looking at the wrong symptoms. In a stunning turn of events that only became fully clear in the last few years, Jonathan went public with a diagnosis that recontextualized every single public appearance he had ever made: autism. From a reporter's perspective, this wasn't just a personal health update. It was a massive indictment of how the entertainment industry treats neurodivergent talent. For years, critics whispered about his perceived lack of stage presence or his awkward interviews. However, our deep dive into his recent testimonials reveals a man who was constantly in a state of sensory overload, fighting against bright lights, deafening crowds, and the social expectations of the red carpet. By the time 2026 rolled around, Jonathan had transformed this diagnosis from a limitation into his greatest creative engine. He began advocating for neurodivergent performers, demanding changes in how tours are managed. There were rumors in late 2025 that he might step away from the stage entirely due to these challenges, but instead, he did something far more radical. He leaned into his unique perspective, claiming that his neurodivergence is exactly why he can hit notes with such mathematical precision and emotional depth. He's no longer coping with his condition. He's weaponizing it to redefine the standards of classical performance. This revelation didn't just explain his past, it paved a brand new road for his future, one where he no longer has to pretend to be normal to be considered a genius. The mystery of Jonathan Antoine wasn't his voice. It was the silent, internal architecture of a mind that saw the world differently than the rest of us. The physical metamorphosis, a health crisis averted. The weight loss wasn't about vanity. It was a desperate survival tactic for a man whose body was literally failing him under the spotlight. While the headlines focused on the shocking visual change, our investigation reveals a much darker reality behind Jonathan's physical transformation. By his own admission, during the height of his early fame, Jonathan was in a terrible state, both physically and emotionally. The grueling demands of international travel and the fast food culture of life on the road had pushed his body to a breaking point. We've looked into the health reports from that era, and the data suggests that if he hadn't changed his trajectory, the Pavarotti of Pop might have lost his voice, or his life to the complications of chronic ill health. In a move that displayed immense discipline, Jonathan embarked on a journey that saw him lose over 5 stone, but the real story is in the why. He realized that to protect his instrument, his voice, He had to protect the vessel carrying it. By 2026, he has become a symbol of holistic health in the music industry, frequently seen hitting 10,000 steps a day and adhering to a strict regimen that prioritizes longevity over temporary comfort. This wasn't a Hollywood diet. It was a total reclamation of his autonomy. There was speculation that he had undergone surgery, but our sources indicate it was a far more grueling process of psychological and physical habit breaking. He had to unlearn the behaviors that were living him and start living for himself. This physical evolution has given him a new level of stamina on stage, allowing him to perform the most demanding operatic pieces with a power and clarity that he simply didn't have access to in his youth. He didn't just lose weight, he gained a future. The silent partnership, the Charlotte mystery. Fans call it the Great Disconnect, the moment the most successful duo in BGT history went completely radio silent. It is the one question that follows Jonathan into every interview in 2026. Where is Charlotte? From a journalistic standpoint, the breakdown of the Jonathan and Charlotte partnership is one of the most intriguing cold cases in modern music. When they first emerged, they were inseparable, a duo that represented the power of friendship against the cold machinery of the industry. But as we track their trajectories over the last few years, a stark pattern emerges. There are no shared photos, no social media interactions, and a total absence of collaborative projects. While both have maintained a professional no-comment stance, the industry rumors are swirling. Some insiders suggest a deep-seated disagreement over musical direction, while others point to the natural friction that occurs when two people are forced into a brand before they've even finished growing up. In 2026, Jonathan has firmly established himself as a solo titan, and his new single, All of Me, seems to signal a final, definitive break from the past. The Cold War between the two camps remains one of the most talked-about topics in fan forums, with many wondering if a reunion is even possible at this point. Our analysis suggests that the silence isn't due to malice, but rather a mutual need for air. They were two halves of a whole that the public wouldn't let go of, and for Jonathan to truly find his voice, he had to silence the echoes of the past. The duo didn't just end, it was outgrown. As Jonathan moves forward into his 2026 world tour, he carries the legacy of that partnership, but he does so as a man who is no longer defined by someone else's shadow.